In 1975, the richest people on Earth per person were not in Switzerland, not in America, not in Kuwait. They lived on a speck of coral in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 8 square miles in size. An island so small you can drive around it in 20 minutes. Its government paid no taxes to collect. Healthcare, schools, even housing free. The national airline flew 7 jets for a population smaller than a college campus. 30 years later, that same country was broke. Its bank had collapsed. Its planes had been repossessed. And it was selling the one thing it had left, its own sovereignty. This is Nauru. And this is the fastest rise and fall of any nation in modern history. Nauru is what happens when geology plays a practical joke. For thousands of years, seabirds crossing the Pacific stopped on this one island. Their droppings, layered over millennia and fossilized with ancient marine deposits, became something extraordinary, some of the purest phosphate rock on the planet. And phosphate, it turns out, is what the 20th century was hungriest for. It's the P in NPK fertilizer, the thing that made modern industrial agriculture possible. The wheat fields of Australia and the pastures of New Zealand were, quite literally, fed by this island. Foreign powers noticed. Germany annexed the island. Then a British-Australian consortium mined it for decades, paying the Nauruans a fraction of a percent of the phosphate's value. But in 1968, everything changed. Nauru became independent, the smallest republic on Earth, and 2 years later it bought out the phosphate industry. For the first time, the money stayed home. And what money it was! Through the 1970s, phosphate prices boomed. By 1975, Nauru's income per person was estimated at $50,000, second in the world only to Saudi Arabia, and by some measures, for a time, the highest anywhere. The government did understand one thing: the phosphate would run out. So it created the Nauru Phosphate Royalties Trust, a sovereign wealth fund, decades before that term was fashionable. Invest the windfall, live off the returns forever. On paper, it was the perfect plan. At its peak, the trust was worth over $1 billion for a nation of fewer than 10,000 people. So what went wrong? Everyone assumes the answer is simple: the phosphate ran out, but that's not it. The phosphate was always going to run out. Nauru knew this, planned for it, and saved for it. What actually failed was everything the plan depended on. Failure 1: the investments. The trust didn't buy boring index funds. It bought trophies: hotels in Melbourne and Honolulu, skyscrapers, and most famously, it financed a West End musical about the life of Leonardo da Vinci. The show was savaged by critics and closed within weeks, millions gone. One bad musical didn't sink Nauru, but it became the symbol of a portfolio chosen by connections and salesmanship, not by strategy. Fees, middlemen, and outright fraud bled the fund for decades. Failure 2: the spending. With no taxes and free everything, government spending ran far beyond what the returns could support. When phosphate revenue dipped, the government didn't cut back, it borrowed, using the trust as collateral. Read that again. They mortgaged the safety net to fund the lifestyle. Failure 3: the island itself. Strip mining had consumed roughly 80% of Nauru's surface, leaving a moonscape of jagged coral pinnacles where nothing grows. The interior of the country, locals call it topside, became uninhabitable. A nation that had cashed out its land now had no land to fall back on. No farming, no tourism, nothing to build a second economy on. By the 1990s, phosphate exports, adjusted for inflation, were running at barely a fifth of their 1970s level. The music was stopping, and every chair had already been sold. The endgame was brutal and fast. The trust's value collapsed from around $1.3 billion in 1990 to roughly 300 million by 2004, sold off, piece by piece, to cover debts. The trophy properties went at fire sale prices. Air Nauru's jets were repossessed. The Bank of Nauru failed, taking people's savings with it. And then Nauru got desperate and creative in the worst ways. In the 1990s, it turned itself into an offshore banking haven with almost no questions asked. Hundreds of shell banks were registered to a single government mailbox. Investigators later alleged that billions in Russian mafia money washed through the island before international pressure shut it down. Then came the passports, sold to anyone who could pay, until they turned up in the wrong hands, and that scheme collapsed too. Finally, in 2001, came the deal that defines Nauru today. Australia would pay Nauru to host an offshore detention center for asylum seekers. Sovereignty itself had become the export product. The human toll ran deeper than money. With the land ruined, nearly all food is imported cheap, processed, canned. Nauru today has among the highest obesity and diabetes rates on Earth. The phosphate didn't just take the island's future, it took its health. So why did Nauru fall? Not because the resource ran out, they knew it would. Nauru fell because extreme wealth, concentrated in a tiny system with no accountability, destroys the very institutions needed to manage it. There was no opposition to ask hard questions, no independent press, no boring bureaucrats saying no to the musical. Economists call it the resource curse, and Nauru is its purest laboratory. A whole country that experienced what happens to a lottery winner with no financial advisor, just faster, and with nowhere to go afterward. Here's the uncomfortable generalization. Norway saved its oil money and built the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. Nauru saved its phosphate money and lost it all. Same plan, same idea. The difference wasn't the plan, it was the institutions checking the plan. Wealth without accountability isn't a windfall, it's a countdown. Next file, the company that invented the future, the digital camera, and then buried it to protect the past. Subscribe so you don't miss how Kodak killed Kodak.